we'll turn our attention to Brother Cam, who is speaking on Mahanaim. All right, Brother Cam.
All right. Good morning. Good morning. It's good to see everybody here today. I hope some of you got good sleep last night. I hope all of you got good sleep last night. Good enough. All right. So today, I just wanted to share a little bit with you. If you weren't here yesterday or weren't in any of those classes, then know that I extend the greetings of the Ecclesia in San Diego, and it's a great ecclesia. If you guys ever come and visit, give us a shout. Love to see you. I like to find things in the Bible. I like to find Easter eggs, as it were. I like to, when I hear when people share things about different scriptures, I like to dig into that and say, am I missing something? Because I know many times as not, as soon as I think I know a passage or a scripture, and I look at it from a different angle, I sometimes turn it sideways and say, well, there was something there I never realized was there. And sometimes those never realized were there things are actually the most profound teaching. And it's like God gives us the first layer to dig into that has some really obvious lessons. He gives us a middle layer to dig into which has less obvious, instruction or information for our life in the Lord. And then sometimes that deepest level is like you really like He's been leading you to that the whole time. And that's the nugget. That's that, you dig about 5 foot down and you find there's a big gold nugget under there, and that was what was waiting for you all along. And I look at that. So today's talk is called Mahanaim or Mahanaim, and it's two camps. And it's a story of the broader story is the story of Jacob and Esau, but in my understanding of how this is unraveled, and it's fairly recent in my studies, is that this is a story of coming. It's kind of a spiritual coming of age, right? The whole discussion on Jacob has so much meat to it, so much to chew on. There are a lot of lessons, but the lesson I don't hear as much is the lesson of coming of age, and it's something I'm kind of in tune to into the scriptures, because I keep looking at myself, wondering when I'm going to come of age, of spiritual maturity, as it were. When am I going to finally get to the point where I'm thinking more spiritually and less fleshly? And I think this account, starting in more or less Genesis 27 and working its way to Genesis 33, actually has some beautiful nuggets of spiritual realization in the life of Jacob, and I think we can see it. And so it looks to me like, and the excerpt that we're going to have later is going to be it's going to be titled Overcoming, but it's about an event in Jacob's life where he becomes a pattern of our spiritual walk, and I love that particular pattern. It informs so much of my thinking, but all of the stuff around it, there's a couple of different phases of Jacob's life that lead us, if we'll put all the pieces together, to see this pattern that really should speak to us about how we should aspire to have a different view of the world and how things are. So we begin, I kind of want to start in the conversation. In Romans 9, there's a discussion that's had in the verse, and it's about how God can choose whomever He will, and the particular one is describing how, Pharaoh is used for a common purpose. And then there's a mention of Esau and Jacob, and it talks about, Jacob whom I have loved and Esau whom I have hated. And it's interesting, in the scriptures, there's not just a whole lot of discussion about God hating or despising some aspect of an individual, right? There's just not a lot of discourse on that. So it's a very peculiar verse. And so as we get into the New Testament discussion, which we're not going to spend a lot of time there in this class, but as we get in the New Testament, that's Romans 9:13 if you want to see that. But it's interesting because it frames for us the dialogue of the story of Jacob and Esau is that Esau manifested something that God was not pleased with, and because of that, it says in the Greek that he hated Esau, and it also tells us something about Jacob that he loves, right? And so it makes a great case study. And it makes a case study not only of their history, but of our lives. You know, if we follow the pattern that God loved in Jacob, then perhaps that will translate into the pattern that God will love in us. So the first thing, I'm just going to call to mind that we do know the pattern of what God loves because he's expressed his own character. So we know that in Exodus 34 that God does say that he's compassionate, right? He's slow to anger, right? He's abounding in love. He's abounding in faithfulness, right? He's always there for us. He'll forgive, and it says he forgives wickedness, he forgives rebellion, and he forgives sin. And he tells us that, really he tells Moses that at that time and puts it on record for our benefit because Moses is asking the question. He's like, you say you're pleased with me, but tell me who you are. And the implication of that comment is that if you tell me who you are, if you're pleased with me when I do what you tell me to do, how much more pleased with me will you be if I know who you are and I follow that voluntarily? That's the implication in the conversation in Exodus 33 that leads to the question of who are you and God expressing himself. So we see in that little bit, right, the idea for us is to identify the things, the characteristics that God is pleased with, and then to, instead of just obeying what he's told us to do, actually seeking ways to model ourselves after that character. And, so I have 2 Peter 1, 1:5, for every reason make every effort. But you know that verse. So there's the Hebrew 12:16 verse, and it speaks of Esau as being godless. Does anybody have an idea of what it might mean to be godless? What does it mean to be godless? Just try. What would it mean to be godless? Yes, ma'am. Without God. Let's expand on that just a tad bit. What does it mean to be godless? If it's without God, what does that mean in a practical daily sense?
Not like what God wants us to do.
Could be not like what God wants us to do, not paying attention to what he wants us to do. Darkness, living in darkness. One thing I would propose to you is thinking when Esau is godless, what it means is there was no thought for God in his life. In other words, he wake up in the morning, right? Does he pray to ask God to give him guidance and direction and seek? Or does he just wake up in the morning and think about what am I going to go about and do today? When the day passes and he looks at stuff, it's a natural and a carnal view, right? He's not bringing God into his life, right? So when we get a conversation on Esau, he's godless. He's a person who has no consideration for God in his life. It's a natural life, right? Fully and completely. Now, yesterday, in the last class of the day, in Genesis 1, I was going to link that. We see, how did I get there from there? All right, anyway, scratch that. I'll remember when I don't need it anymore. So the idea for us is, Genesis 1, 20 through 28, is man's created like the animals. And actually, man's not created like the animals. Man and the animals are created the same way. So effectively, man without understanding, not man without honor, man without understanding, I remembered it this time, is like the beasts that perish. Right? And actually, it's not a simile. That like word is not a simile. Man without understanding is an animal. And as the animals live and as the animals die, so does man. So here's Esau, and he's described as one that God is not in his life. So what is he? He's an animal. And it actually describes him that way, right? He's red, he's hairy, and he has a very natural way about him every day. So we move into the story of Jacob and Esau. Now, the beginning of the story of Jacob and Esau is that they're actually twins, right? We know that they look different, so we know that they're not identical twins. They're fraternal twins. Right? So, but they're born at the same time. So who was born first and who was born second? Who's born first? Who knows who was born first? Esau, right? Okay. So Esau is born first and Jacob is born second. And I'm going to just start with this because this is something we need to watch for in the story. In the Hebrew culture, if you're the firstborn, what do you get? A double portion. So everybody say with me, a double portion. What do you get? Double portion, right? So we start off with this understanding that as Esau and Jacob are growing up together, the same age, they're going to be, Jacob's actually going to wear Esau's clothes later on, so probably around the same size. And they're going through, together, and it seems like there's an affinity between dad and the number one son, right? Jacob knows that his older brother is going to get a double portion and he's going to get a single portion. So I'm going to read Genesis 27. If you'll follow with me. Now in verse 1, when Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare for me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now Rebekah was listening to Isaac, or as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. Now part of the backstory on this in the previous chapter is that when the two boys were born, right, Rebekah knew that the older was going to serve the younger. She knew this because God told her that this was going to happen. So when Rebekah hears that Isaac is asking for Esau to prepare food so he could give him the blessing, she knew this wasn't really the plan of God, right? She knew this wasn't the plan of God. But there's an interesting conversation that's about to take place. And I want you to think about this. Does it look like the Isaac and Rebekah are on the same page with what they're doing with their kids? Are they on the same page? Right? No. It kind of looks a little dysfunctional, doesn't it? It looks like Rebekah is watching out for the interests of the promise through her son Jacob, and it looks like Isaac has got a favorite in Esau for some reason. It doesn't really explain what, right? But we see this thing going on. Not only that, but part of the backdrop story is actually an account where Jacob has prepared this stew, right? Esau has gone out hunting. He's been out a long time. He didn't actually have a successful hunt. He comes back, he's famished, right? And then what happens? What does Jacob do with Esau when he comes back famished? Who knows right off the top of their head? What happens? Bought his birthright, right? But what did he do? His brother is starving. He's like, "I've been out and I haven't eaten. It's been all this time and I'm starving." And what does a good brother do? Right? A good brother says, "I have this food that I've prepared. Come in, sit and eat." But what does Jacob do? Well, I'll tell you what. I've got all this food over here, and if you'll sell me your birthright, right? And I'm looking at this and I'm going, man, is this a dysfunctional family or what? Sell me your birthright. Now here's a question. The birthright of the firstborn is a double portion, right? The birthright of a secondborn, if you only have two, is the third portion, which means everything the father owns is in three portions. Esau gets two, Jacob gets one. If Jacob buys Esau's two, right, then you end up with, I could almost barely do that, Jacob has three birthrights, he's got three portions, and Esau's got nada, right? Esau's got nada. So this is where Jacob is taking Esau. You're starving, I have food, I've got a deal for you, for a bowl of soup or a bowl of stew. Food has a funny place in the narrative of the family of Isaac, doesn't it? Because here we're at this point, and the first thing Isaac says is, it's time to give the blessings of the family to my firstborn. Go out, kill an animal, make me some of that stew I like. Right? It's like food has a funny place in this family, because it seems to be that food is always in a conversation on the transfer of promise, on the transfer of hope. And I kind of wonder if there's not, and I have unfortunately a very healthy relationship with food, in the sense that I like it. And so I'm kind of sensitized to this. There's something going on with this family where they've got this really unhealthy relationship with food, and it's connected to the transfer of the different portions and the inheritance, and it's kind of nutty. So anyway, Rebekah hears that Isaac is ready to do the family blessing on the kids. So it says, so she actually gets Jacob to the side, and she tells him, now my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father. I don't think she needs 2 young goats because his father eats a lot, right? There's a preparation for an inheritance blessing. She's got 2 young goats. Why do you think she's asked for 2 goats? Why did she ask for 2? Well, there's the symbology in the storyline is the 2 represents a double portion, which is a firstborn inheritance and the blessings. But the other thing about 2 is this. In the practical sense, if you're going to make a meal for somebody that's going to be this important, if you have 2 and you ruin one of them, you still have a second one, right? She's covering all her bets. She's making sure as she's preparing in a very practical way that she's got one cooking, she's got another one cooking, she's got 2, and the best one is going to go to Isaac, right? The best of her product. So she's really working the angle to make sure that her son is prepared with this meal for Isaac. So I'm just looking at that. That's what I see in this particular account. That she's really working the angle to make sure that when Isaac goes in front of his father, when Jacob goes in front of his father, I'm going to do this the whole time, that he's really well prepared. He's got the best possible meal he has set up. But this has an interesting twist in the conversation because Jacob actually didn't expect his mother to do this, and we see it in the language. So he's going to take this food to his father, and in verse 11, Jacob says to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him. Would he appear to be tricking his father if he went to his father and pretended to be Esau? No, there's no appearance in that discussion, right? There's no appearance of tricking his father. It's an outright attempt to deceive his father. And deception is another word for lie. So to me, this is a really interesting narrative because what's happened is now the mother knows what the outcome is supposed to be. She's taken it into her own hands. She's told him to lie to his dad so that he could gain a blessing. Now, how many times in the scripture do we find that there's a necessity to lie and deceive so that we can inherit a blessing from God and from any other source? Does a lie precede blessings? Right? When the first time you read this, did you think, wow, that's a really good idea? I think I'm gonna adopt that approach. Right? Or you think, ooh, that seems a bit risky. And that's what he tells his mom. He's like, it's going to look like I'm trying to deceive my dad. It's not going to look like you're trying to deceive your dad. You're trying to deceive your dad. That's the plan. Right? And so what does Rebekah say? My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say and go get them for me. Now, let me ask you a question. If his dad then curses Jacob, is there a kind of a slide function where the curse then falls on the mother? Is that how that works? If the dad curses Jacob because of his lie, does the curse slide off onto the mother? The mom, Rebekah says, let the curse fall on me if he does that. Is that how that works? I mean, when God curses somebody, does the person have the ability to say, just shove that over on the guy next to me, the shirt with the arrow that says this way? Doesn't work that way, does it? When this was the plan, it may have seemed really good on the ground. But we know how the whole thing worked. Jacob, Isaac, when Jacob comes to him, he knows something's not right. He knows something is not right. And we're going to fast forward because you know this story, but I want to get down to the end of the story. After Isaac blesses Jacob, and he's doing this thing with Jacob, and he hears the voice, and he can't really see, and he's like, wow, this is interesting. Who are you really? And he says, no, I'm your son, Esau. And so he grabs him. It actually says he grabs him, and he could feel the hair on the arms because the mom had taken the fleece from the sheep and had wrapped him with it, so he felt it, so he could feel that there was a lot of hair there. And he said, but the voice is the voice of Jacob, right? And then he says he embraced him. So he didn't just give him a hug. He grabbed him and he pulled him over because he's overruling. He's got one sense that says it's Jacob. He's got the hands that say it's Esau, and he smells, and he was wearing Esau's clothing. And what does he smell? I smell the dew of the field. I smell, the country. This is my son, Esau. And then he blesses him there. He blesses him there. Esau comes in almost immediately after Jacob leaves, having been fully deceived. And he comes to his dad and he says, look, I've prepared this, I've prepared this meal for you to receive my blessing. And the response of Isaac was kind of violent. He is kind of like, if truly this is you, then who was it that I just blessed and gave all the blessings that I was going to give to you? And the comment is interesting because I love, the symbology in these stories. And one of them is the name Jacob, right? Esau is actually connected to the food that he ate that was a red stew, and it connects to Edom, which has to do with red and red clay. But Jacob has to do with deceiving, right? It has to do with deceiving. The name in it means a supplanter, one who takes what is another's. And it has, so it's this really interesting symbology. And that's actually a call that Esau says at this time, is he not rightly named Jacob, for he has deceived me these 2 times, right? So it's interesting that, that you're given a name to be a supplanter from the beginning. It's interesting, at this point that he calls it out. He is truly a deceiver. Did you think about the first time with the stew, when he gives his brother the stew, that he's deceiving his brother in some way? Right? We don't get enough of the story to see that picture because it seems like a straightforward transaction, right? But here's Esau, and what is Esau saying? He has now twice deceived me. He's talking about his birthright. He's deceived me. So I don't know what that's all about, but Esau is saying that my brother has deceived me twice. He has undermined me twice. And it's really interesting because it's a really sad statement at this time, because you can see Esau, he's in tears. He's begging his father for some kind of blessing. And his father's like, well, the blessing I've already given to your other brother. Now, we're going to fast forward to Genesis 31. I say that, I think we're going to fast forward to Genesis 32. Yeah, we're going to fast forward to 32. So the following chapters of Genesis are the conversation on Jacob going to Laban's house, finding a bride there. He ends up with 2 wives and 2 concubines, and at this point in time, 11 children. So his last child, Benjamin, the son of my right hand, has not been born. Right? He leaves before the last child is born to Rachel. But so now it's kind of an interesting dynamic, because what's happened is his father, and I think he says this in chapter 31, but his father has changed his wages like 7 times, right? Every time he goes to work, his father is giving him some of the flocks that he's working for his father. He's giving him a percentage of them as his wage. And flocks in tribal communities are wealth, right? You generally don't eat all of your flocks because that's your wealth. So as he's growing his wealth, right, his father would say, well, you're being too successful, which means you're taking too many of the sheep that would otherwise be mine, and cattle and whatnot, and camels and all these other things. And he's saying, well, so we're going to change the rate for which you work. But every time he did that, God blessed him and gave him more and more and more. But he's at the point where he realizes that his father-in-law and the other kids of the father-in-law are getting quite jealous of this wealth that he has accumulated, right? And so he realizes he has to escape. And so he tries 2 or 3 times to leave. And finally, he manages to get away from the family of Laban. And they kind of do it at night. He escapes with his wives and his kids and all his flocks. And they move at an extremely fast rate of maybe 4 miles a day. How many days does it take to get out of sight of Laban's camp before? So he's racing at a snail's pace out of Laban's camp. but his objective is to get out of Laban's camp, and he's still trying to kind of figure out where he's going. And so what he does at the beginning of Genesis 32 is he sends some of his men, some of the servants that he's accumulated that help with the flocks and all of this, and he sends them to go meet Esau. Because how did he leave the house of Isaac? What was the state of Esau's attitude when he left? Who would like to volunteer that? Yeah, Esau was pretty angry. Yeah, the word murder was in the discussion, right? I'm going to kill my brother. So, absolutely. So he's terrified for his life, right? But this is this is 4 wives, 11 kids later, huge. So he sends a note to Esau that I'm coming. But in the note that he sends to Esau, right, with the servants that he sends to Esau, he says something really interesting, right? He says this. It's verse 5 of Genesis 32. Go to Laban, talk to them. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, men servants, maid servants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord, elevating him, that I might find favor in your eyes. Why does he tell him all of those things? Right? We don't really know yet, but we're about to get there in the account. But I just wanted to kind of start your thinking around part of the message that Jacob sends to Esau is, I have a lot of stuff, right? And I'm coming to you. And he's elevating his firstborn brother. Now, was he elevating his firstborn brother before he left the house of Isaac? He was undermining his brother. He was doing everything he could to get whatever his brother was going to get. And in the end, what he had by right was all of the cattle, right? All of the blessings, right? All the land. Well, they didn't really own land. They were nomadic. But he would own everything when his father died. That was the outcome, and Esau would have nothing. So his message to Esau is, hey, I've got a lot of stuff, and I'm submitting to you as my Lord. That's really, when he calls him Lord, he's elevating Esau in the dialogue, okay? And that's important to understand when we start reading what's going on here. But how many people, his servants come back and said, Esau's coming, and he's got some people with him. How many people? Do you remember? Yeah, not 4. 400, I know what you meant. 400, right? He's got 400 people. Why do you bring 400 people? Right? If Esau hates your guts and you left and he was ready to murder you, why is he bringing 400 people? Right? This is the mind of Jacob. This is what he's saying. Right? I was hoping to appease my Lord, and he's bringing 400 people. So what he immediately does, and this tells us in Genesis 32, is he divides his flocks. He divides the camels. He divides his family. Now, there's a story later on about the family and the relationship of the family that's quite interesting, right? And we end up with Joseph. And Joseph is now like the youngest born son because Benjamin hasn't been born to Rachel yet. And later on in the story, what is the brothers' attitude toward Joseph? Is he like their favorite? The youngest child and everybody loves him? It should be like this or this. Which one is it? Man, as a matter of fact, they even pretend to kill. They almost do kill him, and they get talked down off of that particular event, and they sell him instead because that's so much better to strangers, and then take him to Egypt. But the interesting thing about that is you kind of wonder how a family gets to where they get opposed. The children get opposed to one other child. But here, what happens is the families are separated. The children of the handmaidens are placed in front. The children of Leah are placed in front. There's only one child with Rachel, and he's in the back. And it tells us why Jacob does this. Perhaps if Esau attacks, some of them will get away. Now imagine being one of the other children, one of the 10 children, and you've been placed in front. Just in case Esau attacks, that you will be the ones that will distract his armies while they're killing you so that the younger brother can get away, right? That's what's going on. And he's placing these families and the children stacked with Joseph in the back with Rachel. And he's got, cattle and sheep, and he's placed them in layers, so he's going to send them in layers to Esau. But here's the thing. He doesn't run away. He's set on this plan to go to Esau, and you just got to wonder why. Why is he going to Esau? Now, the other thing that's happening is as he's layering these cattle and sending them to Esau, he's actually telling his servants that when you get to Esau, say, and this is a gift for you. So what's going on in Jacob's mind? Is it just that he's afraid and he's trying to buy his brother off, right? Appease the potential anger, or is there something else going on? And I think there's something else going on, and it's revealed to us as we go. Now, he is afraid, and there's a prayer, and it starts in verse 9. And I'm going to read that, and then I'm going to go to Mahanaim. Jacob prays to God, and so you see his fear here. "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Go back to your country.'" So God has told him, return to your country. Don't just escape Laban's hands, but go to your country. Go back to your family. Go back to your relatives, and I will make you prosper. Jacob says to God, "I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray you, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me." This is what's really in his heart. This is what he's afraid of. "I'm afraid my brother Esau is going to come and attack me." He's remembering his anger and what happened in his household. Let me just say it. The deceit by which I operated and undermined him and stole his birthright and his blessings, he remembers. And I'm afraid he's going to come and attack me, and also the mothers and also the children. "But you have said, 'I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted.'" So what he's telling God is, yeah, I'm terrified. Here's 400 men. They're coming, right? I'm afraid, right? But why am I going to my family? Because I'm trusting you, because you've told me to return there, right? You've told me to return, and you've promised me that you will make my descendants like the sand on the seashore. So I'm trusting you, right? And a revelation is about to happen. Jacob is about to have this insight that's going to change his life. And I'm going to look back at Genesis 32, verse 1, so if you'll follow me there. And there's something that happens here that's quite unusual. So it's not just the first verse, but it's what happens, after this prayer that are combined that tell us that something is happening. And I believe that the first verse is actually kind of a summary statement about when Jacob is on the travels and he gets to this place and he sees angels of God. And this is actually Malak. And Malak is actually the word for angels. And Jacob saw them and he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Mahanaim. Now, the interesting thing about the Hebrew is very similar to the Greek in this, is the word for angels literally means messenger. Now, in the Hebrew, when you see malak, it might first mean an angelic being, but it ultimately can mean any messenger. It can be men. But oftentimes in the Hebrew, the use of that particular word implies an angelic being. In the Greek, the angelos, or angelos, is a word that's used for angel, but generally it means messenger. And it can be, there's kind of an inverse in emphasis between angel in the Greek versus angel in the Hebrew. So it's interesting that the idea is that God is delivering a message. It might be through angelic beings, and that's the way the first verse phrases it. And he says, so he names the place Mahanaim. This is the camp of God. And Mahanaim is an interesting word. It means a double camp. So it doesn't just mean camp of God, it means a double camp, right? So that's interesting because now we're going to get, as we get past about verse 13. So it says Jacob spent the night there, and from what he had with him selected a gift from his brother Esau. So he put 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes. This is a lot of wealth he's putting out in front of him. 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls. So that's enough to create a flock. 40 cows, right? Female cows, and 10 bulls. So that's your breeding stock. So he's not just giving him cows, he's giving him breeding stock, which is what makes the cows really valuable. 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys, breeding stock. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, said to his servants, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." So Esau is going to receive a gift, going to receive a gift, going to receive a gift. And this gift is about inheritance. He's giving Esau, right? He's giving Esau wealth that will grow, right? And why would he be inclined to give Esau wealth that will grow? He instructed the one in the lead, When my brother Esau meets you and asks, to whom do you belong and where are you going and who owns all these animals in front of you, then you are to say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau. He's coming behind us. And he instructed several others of the same. Let's see. And I have skipped my verse. That is it. So I'm going to look back at verse 10, and this is an emphasis point I want to make to you. When he came from his father's house, he had the clothing on his back and a staff, right? So what was it he was pursuing all this time? When he made the stew and sold it to his brother, when he stole the birthright of his father, right? What was he pursuing? Firstborn inheritance, right? He was pursuing the wealth of his father. He was pursuing acceptance as a firstborn instead of just that of a secondborn. This is what he was after. And here's what he says: when I left my father's house, after all that I did, after negotiating for the firstborn birthright, after negotiating for the blessings, I actually left my father's house with just a staff and the clothing on my back. I crossed the Jordan, but now I've become two groups. And I think I don't think this is something he'd been thinking about a long time. I think from the way this frames it and from the Genesis 32:1 verse, with calling the place Mahanaim, the two camps, that what is happening is he's having this realization. I did all this stuff in my household. I operated with deceit. I was trying to steal, as it were, my brother's birthrights and all this. I ended up with nothing. And what has happened, without me even being focused on it or attentive to it, is that while I was working for Laban, you blessed me and you gave me a double portion. You gave me two camps. Now, it's interesting, in Genesis 32:1, it says angels, but here it says he's looking at his family and he's identifying in his family two camps. Now, what is a firstborn inheritance? What is it? It's a double portion, right? So what he's realizing is, without even trying, without it being my pursuit and my hand in the works to make an outcome happen, more than just getting my father's double portion and firstborn in my physical household, my God has blessed me with two camps. He has realized at this moment that he is, in a sense, a firstborn of God, right? And while he's afraid of what's coming with his brother, he's acting on his faith in God because he recognized that God has given him a promise. He's promised that he'll have children that will be seed, like sand on the seashore, that his generations will grow from him. So he's trusting God, and he's visually seeing that God has already made him a firstborn, right? His efforts led to disaster. God's gift led to life and hope and a family, right? These are the things he has. Now, I want to finish this part of the conversation with Genesis 33. And I think this is the thing that kind of finished it for me. I was looking at this and putting the pieces together. And in Genesis 33, we actually have the meeting of Jacob and the meeting of Esau. And I want to call your attention to what happens when they meet, right? So now we're all in tune with the angst that's going on in the heart of Jacob. But Jacob looks up, and there is Esau coming with his 400 men. This is where the rubber meets the road. I'm terrified, and I'm going to send you all this stuff. But he sees this veritable army of men with Esau, and they're coming. And he divided his children among Leah and Rachel and the two maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, which the children are definitely going to remember. Leah and her children next, which they're going to remember. And Rachel and Joseph in the rear. And he himself went on ahead. At least he went first, right? He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Bowed down 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him. And he threw his arms around his neck, and he kissed him. and they wept. Jacob wasn't crying in the arms of his older brother, barely older. Wasn't crying in the arms of his older brother because of relief of not having his family killed. When he embraced his brother, he embraced a brother that he had abandoned. He embraced a brother that he had deceived. He embraced a brother whose blessings he took. You see, we don't have it spelled out for us, but we actually do kind of have it spelled out for us. The whole time, while he is afraid of what may be happening with his brother, the whole time, as Jacob is realizing the blessings don't come in the physical realm from physical pursuit, right? And doing for yourself, the great and true blessings that we're really hoping for are the blessings that come from God, and God made a way for Jacob. Right? And when Jacob realized that, and he realized that instead of trying to take control of everything to make it happen, that God was in control of all these things, that at some point he began to realize what he had done and whom he had damaged. And that was the reason for dividing the flocks. He had so many flocks, but what he wanted to do with his brother, and what he actually didn't want to do, what he did do, is he was making reconciliation to his brother. For the theft of the birthright, he was giving him an inheritance. For the theft of his blessings, he was giving him more inheritance. He was sharing with his brother that I understood what I did. And you know what I think Esau understood? Esau understood the same thing. Esau understood the same thing. And this is an interesting thing, because ultimately what you end up with is, while he didn't start with the right behavior, and you know how many times in my own life I realize in the past when I'm trying to take control of the outcomes and trying to make the outcomes work, that ultimately it's where God's involved that things turn right, even when I'm not even thinking about how to make them right. And the question I have is Rebecca was given the outcome that was going to happen. She wasn't told how to make it happen. In her mind, she knew the outcome that was supposed to happen, so she took control when she saw things going sideways. But I think the lesson to all of us, and that's not peculiar to Rebecca, I think we share in that thing. We start getting close to the finish line and it's not working out, and what do I need to do to make it happen the way it's supposed to happen? Right? That's very natural for us. But I think what we find out in this story is what God is revealing to us is, I was always in control. If Rebecca had not taken control at that point, if it hadn't unwound that way, God would have made it unwind another way, because he had already determined the outcomes. And I think that's important for us to remember, that when we're feeling at a time like things aren't turning out the way they need to turn out, we don't have to, especially if it's a conflict with our conscience and with moral and ethical behaviors, we don't have to go sideways with what's right to make sure that what is right will happen. God is in control. And this is the story that shares that with us. God's going to make it happen the way it's supposed to happen, and we can trust him. And even if it looks like we have to take control to make things right, the truth is we don't. What we have to do is we have to trust. We have to pray. We have to wait for God to reveal how he's going to deliver us. And I think that's, in my estimation, that's the message that we're given right here. I want to kind of close thoughts on this with this last thing is Esau's like, here, let me take you. Let me bring you back home. Let my men help your men and bring you back home. And Jacob says, we've got it. The wives and the kids, they move at their own pace. If we go too fast, the young animals would die. We got it. And do they go home? They don't. They don't return to Isaac. They actually go, I think it's Padan Aram. They turn left. Right? And they're still regionally close by. But it's interesting. It's like Jacob is making sure there's no question that his goal is not to take Esau's birthright. He never ends up receiving in his life the physical inheritance of his father, because Esau ends up taking the inheritance that he still has and ends up going to Edom with it. So what I find interesting is it starts with this fight to get the firstborn of Isaac's material goods, but in the end, it never happens, because he has been given sufficient and been made a firstborn of God by having two camps created, God communicating to him clearly through the angel of his family. that he's been given a double portion and is acceptable to God and is protected by God. And that to me, I think, is a beautiful story. So I'll close with that, and then just the comfort of knowing that God's got it. Trust, God's got it.